Warning, this content is for entertainment and educational purposes only. This video is brought to you by First Detachment Nutrition. Battle tested, expert formulated. Use discount code AB10 at checkout for 10% off. All right, folks. Big Paul here today with Kurt Havens. What's going on, Kurt?
Nothing, man. Thanks for having me on again.
You've been a busy man. You're hard to pin down. You're the hot name right now.
That's what it seems like. We'll see if we can keep this up.
Well, today I wanted to get you on to talk about estrogen. I had quite a few requests for this video, and there seems to be a good bit of confusion about estrogen. People wanted me to talk about estrogen. Things have changed in the bodybuilding community over the last decade or so. I remember in the early 2000s up through 2010, it was like crush your estrogen, get it as low as you possibly can. And then now things have come full circle and going the other way. It's let's let estrogen run as high as we possibly can, that it's going to help with muscle growth and side effect mitigation and make us live longer and turn us into Superman. And I wanted to dig into estrogen today, and we can go into the nuts and bolts of it, how it works, strip it down to the basics, and then talk about the various things that are being talked about now, and sort of our opinions on it and what works and what doesn't work. This, folks, this is the type of stuff that is in our Anabolics e-course. There is a link to it in the video description below. We have a bunch of deep dives like this. I just put 4 new side effect management videos up today on lipids, on gyno, there is one on estrogen where we go a little deeper into estrogen as well. There's some other stuff up there too, but I think there's almost 90 modules in there
or more.
Now.
Might be more.
Yeah, something like that. And we're going to continue to add stuff there too. And we're going to also add a monthly live Q&A for members only, where you can ask anything. We might say no.
We're not answering.
But you can ask, and it's stuff that we can't talk about on YouTube, obviously. But this is all sort of science-based information, but in the realm of bodybuilding, where anecdote meets the studies. So we're going to dig into estrogen a little bit today, and hopefully Kurt can demystify this a bit for you. I mean, to be honest with you, there was some stuff that I didn't quite understand with estrogen when I first started working with you, Kurt. So let's start at the basics and work our way up.
Sure. So just in case someone only is going to watch the first 15 minutes of this video, I'll give you my summation first. So unlike what was going on in previous decades with crushing it, and unlike what's going on now with it running super high, I believe it should be more moderate. Somewhere, generally for most guys, 9 out of 10 times, it should probably be in range on blood work. Is generally the safest, most sane way to do it. There are exceptions to every rule. I don't want to speak in absolutes. There are exceptions, but you and I both get tons of consult calls with people that have all sorts of issues, and very often high estrogen is the cause of those issues. So usually it's pretty sane to run it in range. Okay.
Yeah, so we all get that phone consult call. Oh my God, my PP doesn't work. Yeah. What can you do to fix it? And it is, in my experience, I don't know what you see, Kurt, but it is almost always estrogen's gotten too high.
And it's generally so high that I'm almost in disbelief that they wouldn't even just see that on the labs. Like that it's red and it's flagged and it's 4 times the limit. So estrogen it's a category of sex hormones. So technically we're really like from the most basic point of view, we're talking about testosterone and estrogen are these sex hormones. Progesterone technically is not a sex hormone. It has a supportive role there. There are basically 3 major types of estrogen. There are over 75 things, though, that I'm aware of that bind to the estrogen receptors and cause a genetic response. But we're just talking about these main categories. And there is a 4th one, E4, that is only present in pregnant women. So we're totally not concerned with that. This is a discussion mainly for men. We can also do something on the learning module specifically for women with estrogen. Estrogen, similar to growth hormone, is sexually dimorphic, meaning that its response, the human body's response to it, is based on your sex that you were born with, for lack of better terms. Women respond differently to estrogen than men do. So a lot of the stuff you hear bodybuilders recite is not necessarily relevant in men. So really what we're mainly concerned with is E2, which is estradiol, which is going to be the most present estrogen in the human body, both in men and women, at least premenopausal. And it's the most potent. It's about 10. The other one that you do see in bodybuilders to some extent is E1, estrone, depending on what drugs they're using or what else is going on in their body. But estradiol is about 10 times as potent. So it's going to really be the dominant one. So estrogen is considered an E strain or C18 derivative, is a gonad core similar to so testosterone's an androstane, which is a C19. And the reason why I bring this up, when you look at things like trembolone, trestolone, ment, nandrolone, those are technically E strain steroids. They're technically based more similarly to estrogen than they are to testosterone. And that is just because when you play with carbon 19, you demethylate it, you basically make it into like a C18 almost. So they're technically classified as E strains as well. So that's what we're talking about today. So the action of estrogen is mediated mostly through a nuclear receptor, the same as testosterone. The biggest difference is that there are two different estrogen receptors. There is only one type of androgen receptor. You have estrogen receptor A and estrogen receptor B. I'm not going to go into the differences. They're located in different places. They have different functions. Cancer can be mediated through both, depending on where you're discussing it. There's not one that's good and one that's bad necessarily. And there's also a cell membrane estrogen receptor or membrane or MER, and it's a specific gene called GPR30. Same as testosterone has one. So it's what causes the non-genomic estrogen response. So as soon as the cell senses estrogen, it will have a non-genomic response as well. But that's not necessarily relevant to what we're talking about. An interesting point is quantitatively, estrogen still is lower both in men and women than androgens. So women technically have more testosterone floating in their blood than they do estrogen. It's that the scale is measured differently. So the number looks larger. But women clearly have more estrogen, at least they should, than men. So some of the things that estrogen does do is, so people probably heard me say before, it's not anabolic. When I say that, I try to clarify that it's not anabolic in the classic sense. Similar to growth hormone. Growth hormone is anabolic, right? But it's not necessarily building tissue directly. So estrogen in men, and we're talking about men here specifically, is anabolic in terms of bone, collagen, tendon, ligaments. It actually decreases joint stiffness. It's one of the reasons why women have less muscle strains than men because of estrogen, because the estrogen
I didn't know
higher.
that. That's it.
That being said, though, it does not necessarily strengthen all tendons because women are 2 to 8 times more likely to have an ACL tear than men. So some of that also is the angle of their hips, because their hips, it's called Q angle. Their knees are loaded a little bit on the side, so their knees tend to be a little more fragile. But so estrogen doesn't always heal joints. It increases bone formation. It's technically anti-inflammatory. It's also called nociceptive. Nociceptive is when you dull pain that normally doesn't respond to drugs. So it's why women can give birth, and you and I would never tolerate that pain. It regulates energy in the human body to some degree. It maintains vessels and your skin. It increases HDL cholesterol, but it also increases triglycerides. It decreases LDL though. So as a whole, it still has a positive effect generally on lipids. Some of this stuff that applies more to bodybuilding. So fluid balance. So it causes salt and water retention, right? So we see this a ton. Guys of high estrogen, they tend to look very wet. And then nowadays, no one wants to lower their estrogen. Instead, they use an ARB to try to mitigate that effect through the kidneys when that's not necessarily the proper way to deal with that. It increases cortisol. It increases sex hormone binding globulin. Now, sex hormone binding globulin, we've probably done a separate video on. We could always do another one because that's a whole other thing that's very misunderstood. Sex hormone binding globulin is regulated by other things, and it's generally not an independent factor that you and I would really look at. It's kind of a symptom of other things. So generally, I'm not trying to move sex hormone binding globulin up and down. It's just telling me what other hormones are doing. It increases cholesterol and bile, something you see in postmenopausal women and in bodybuilders toward the end of prep when they lower their estrogen dramatically. So you notice your digestion gets weird. Your stomach might stick out a little bit. It's because you basically have the bile is not working properly. So you can't really digest protein or fat, which is, of course, what we're typically eating at that point.
Dan, can I stop you there for a second?
Yeah.
I know a lot of bodybuilders will throwing ox bile and stuff like that at the end of prep, that's probably why, right?
Yeah. Yep.
I don't know how much it helps.
If you ever pulled testosterone, you probably don't do this, but I've pulled testosterone fully out. If you're in an AI, then it's dumb. I'm not recommending this, but you do see this. I've experimented with lots of things just so I can understand what's actually occurring, so I can speak to it better. If you pull testosterone fully out and use an AI at the same time, even though there's no substrate to stop aromatizing, you do see bodybuilders do this. You'll really screw your digestion up. Like you always have trouble contracting your abs.
Anybody that's gotten to the end of contest prep, they know that digestion sucks that last week or two.
That's
it
generally
just stinks. So that would be why, because of the estrogen effect on it.
Okay. So it technically can be a carcinogen. Now, when I say that, it doesn't mean it is a carcinogen. It can based on its structure. So we have to understand something. DHT cannot, because it has what we call a saturated A ring. So the A ring is on these molecules, it has a hydrogen and oxygen. That ring where that is attached to is the A ring. That is saturated in DHT, and technically it cannot interact with cancer cells in that way, which estrogen can, because it has an unsaturated ring. Estrogen can be prosexual and the opposite of that, right? So we see there's a very finite space with estrogen for you and I, where as long as testosterone is good, if estrogen, there's that sweet spot, right, where everything works properly. And then if it's too low or too high, it obviously doesn't work. It regulates DNA repair. It also works as an antioxidant. So and it regulates transcription of DNA and translation of base pairs. But what we see, this is kind of where I think some of the confusion stems from. So we say things like it's neuroprotective. That just means it's basically acting as an antioxidant. It's removing oxidative stress from your liver, your kidneys, your brain, your heart to some degree. That's really what it's doing. It does increase glycogen storage. You'll notice when you crush your estrogen at the end of prep that it's very hard to fill out, right? Your muscles are flat. Or if you've ever just driven your estrogen lower, you notice you can't get a pump. Like your muscles actually hurt. They get stringy. It improves cognitive function. It suppresses binging, believe it or not. So like at the end of prep also, when you have that really high, you get a really weird dopamine thing from trenbolone, right? You want to spend money and you want to eat. You want to like basically do excessive things. Part of that also is from lower estrogen. So your brain just doesn't work right. It increases, this is kind of
so you're explaining why I buy stupid stuff like closet organizers at the end of contest prep.
Or a car. The guys
and I start fantasizing about exotic sports cars.
Exactly. So these are an example of some things that it does both. It increases linear growth in teenagers, but it also stops linear growth. So as estrogen goes up during puberty in boys and girls, it'll increase bone growth. But then when it gets to a certain threshold, and a lot of that's individual, it'll actually stop the plates from growing. So when in children with delayed growth, we tend to use growth hormone and a lot of times use Arimidex with that. Because if you can blunt the estrogen response, you can allow the plates to still grow. Otherwise, growth hormone won't do anything as far as bone growth is concerned. It increases bone mineral density, right? We see this in women all the time. As they get postmenopausal, they're much more prone to fractures. It is vasoprotective. So in the heart, not only is it an antioxidant, but it protects your actual blood vessels. So it's metabolized by hydroxylation and conjugation in the liver and the kidneys, same as testosterone. It is excreted via the gastrointestinal tract and the kidneys and liver. So you pee it out and you poop it out. It is made from cholesterol, just like any other technical steroid hormone. And it's generally synthesized from androstenedione to estrone, and estrone can become estradiol, or androstenedione to testosterone through aromatase to estradiol. So it can be made a couple different ways. Your body's very efficient at figuring out ways to make things if you block one pathway. Now, this is where we get more to the bodybuilding specific stuff. I just wanted to get a lot of that out of the way. Estrogen in the liver produces lipoproteins, so what cholesterol is attached to, binding proteins, and helps with blood clotting. And it acts as an antioxidant in the liver. It's required by the liver to some degree in order for it to function properly and maintain its health. That being said, estrogen in the liver is not what's causing the production of IGF in the presence of growth hormone. That is insulin, protein, and glucose. And you can tell by the structure of it, this is why it's called insulin growth factor 1, because it's a peptide hormone related to insulin. So when I said it produces binding proteins, so this is the metabolism here, you can see. when I say producing binding proteins, specifically what we're talking about as far as bodybuilding is concerned are IGF binding proteins. So this is where the confusion really gets crazy with IGF and estrogen. So humans have 7 binding proteins associated with IGF. The 7th one is somewhat debatable, but for the sake of the argument, we'll say there's 7 binding proteins. Cattle, ruminants, sheep, pigs don't. They have binding protein 2 through 6. They're missing 1 and 7. Binding protein 1. So binding proteins with IGF, because again, we're just with estrogen and bodybuilding, we're just going to focus on the IGF part of binding proteins. There are other binding proteins, but they're not necessarily related to this. What we're talking about is both things that allow IGF to work better, like binding protein 3, and things that make it worse, like binding protein 1. So as estrogen escalates, binding proteins increase, but binding protein 1 specifically in humans. And this is a natural regulatory factor, and this is one of the reasons why women are less muscular than men. So as our estrogen goes up, the IGF might creep up in the serum, but it's also more bound and useless. So running your estrogen high for the sake of IGF doesn't make a lot of sense because you're binding protein 1 and you're binding estrogen to binding protein 1 and making it useless. What we care about is IGF that's inside the muscle, because it has to splice to the mechanical growth factor in order to actually do anything inside muscle, as far as muscle is concerned. But that's where the confusion sets in. In animals, like I said, ruminants, cattle specifically, they don't have the binding protein 1, so you can add estrogen like you see with the trenbolone studies to a male cow, and they will grow. We are not cattle. So this is kind of the disparity here, that if you're only reading the abstract of a trenbolone study from the 70s, you're probably not picking up on this because they don't go into these details. These are things that are taught, that the scientists who are doing this stuff, they understand this. So it's not necessarily communicated in the study because it's just understood. So that's kind of the thing. So I would say, based on what estrogen actually does in the human body, in the male body, to me, it makes sense just to run it in range, right? So you're getting the health benefits, you're getting the mood benefits, cognitive benefits, protective benefits, sexual benefits, but you're not, and you're producing enough binding protein 3 to actually use IGF, but you're not going to hinder it. You're also not going to create a place that can be dangerous. So like I said before, estrogen, when it's super elevated, it can be a carcinogen, right? It's related to breast cancer, prostate cancer, colon cancer. There's all sorts of things that are related to that. So you don't typically want to run estrogen high. What typically happens is, like I said before, it's hydroxylated and it's excreted through the gastrointestinal tract. If there's an excess of it and it's not excreted, you don't eat enough fiber and it doesn't come out, it'll go back to the liver and it'll form a different form of estrogen, and that becomes the carcinogen. So that's where it becomes a big risk. So should be a slide that shows women's estrogen levels.
So it's also I just don't understand why guys would let it run too high. For me, like, you just start feeling like dog crap. Period.
You look crazy, right? Like, it's not, when my wife overhears like a lot of the stuff that we talk about, and she's always confused by it, because if you look at like, what are the classic high estrogen like symptoms? Is that really the look that we're chasing? It doesn't make any sense. So if you see here, this like purple line in the middle at the peak. So ignore the very top one. That's the upper limit. But the second tallest one is basically during ovulation, when estrogen is highest in a female. And you'll notice that it's at 200. So you and I both know bodybuilders that run their estrogen close to that level. Do you really want to run your estrogen where an ovulating female is? It makes zero sense to me. And again, if you just go back to morphology, the way we developed as a species, there's a reason why men are more muscular than women. This is not a classic anabolic hormone, and that more is better.
And not just that, the ovulating female is only there for a few days. Not all month.
No, because
not for an entire 16-week cycle. I'll see it, Kurt. I'll see it all the time. I get guys come to me for consults, and they have high blood pressure, they have erectile dysfunction, they have these bad mood swings, they have bloating, and they can't figure out what's going on. And it is almost always they've let their estrogen get too high. And I think there's just a lot of bad information out there.
And that's it. And that's all I'm trying to do here. I'm not going to make a generalized statement that it needs to be run at this specific number. Like I said in the beginning, you probably see the same thing. You personally, I personally feel the best when it's in range, right? That's generally where I feel the best.
Yep.
Sometimes a little bit high on the outside, but when I say a little bit high, I'm talking right on the edge of it. I don't mean 90, 100, 150. To me, that's way out of the range.
Yeah, and I've played around with my numbers. I'm not one of these people that's OCD and getting my blood work done every other week, but I do check periodically, and I feel the best when mine is kind of on the high end of normal or maybe just a tad over, like somewhere in the 40 to 50 range is where in the off season.
Yeah, I mean, if your androgen load is higher, right? Like if you're running 1,000 milligrams of test for example, and your estrogen is in the 50s, that's totally fine.
And I go much higher than that, then I start having, first thing it hits me is erectile dysfunction and bloating. My blood pressure will start going up and I have a bunch of water retention. Yep. And I think I heard you say it on your video with the AJ, like everybody wants telmisartan to be the answer for a lot of times the high blood pressure is just from too much estrogen.
Yeah. And I talk about this on Vigorous Steve's podcast that comes out next week as well. It's using the right drug for the right purpose, right? We have an AI. It doesn't make any sense. You can leverage, if you're doing a very big steroid cycle and you want to leverage a DHT to help manage estrogen, fine, you can do that. But should you leverage, if you're a guy on TRT and you're middle age and you're not competing as a bodybuilder and you're not running grams of gear, is it really wise to add a gram of a DHT that's not human approved? To try to manage it, when we have a drug that does it perfectly fine. Now, with the data concern, because then we always get this, but Arimidex causes this problem and this. The two commonalities that you see always, the side effects from Arimidex seem to be about the same size as the crashing of estrogen. And the reason being is all of the studies, if you go to PubMed, you look this up, all of the studies are on women with cancer, and they're taking a milligram a day, and their estrogen is bottomed out. So in women, the suppression is 100% from milligram a day. And man, it's 80, 88, 84 to 88, something like that. So it's even a milligram a day is not fully suppressing a man. Not that most men need to ever take a milligram a day. But what you're seeing as side effects is the result of the crushed estrogen. It's not a result of the drug. Where the insanity comes, the thought process is so flawed to me. All we're trying to do is keep estrogen where it should be. We're not using it to crush. Outside of show prep, you're not using it to crush estrogen. We're just trying to manage it. That's all we're doing. There are no side effects associated with managing estrogen. Yeah, you've seen my cholesterol before. My estradiol was at 29. It was in range, and I was using a milligram of Arimidex every other day, and my cholesterol was immaculate. It's not going to skew those numbers per se. It's about keeping things healthy. It's not about, I didn't run my estrogen at 5. That's clearly not healthy, right? And I didn't run it at 100. That's not good either.
Now, with that said, we will bury estrogen at the end of contest prep, but that's just for a few weeks we're talking about. And AJ and I talked about that, and he said, I don't know if he said it in the video or if he said it off camera, but during contest prep, the look is the most important thing. It's going to supersede health for a couple weeks. It's a couple weeks. You're not going to cause harm in 2 or 3 weeks, right? If you went to college, you probably caused more harm on a weekend than you did in the last. Believe me, I had some rough weekends in college.
So it's like that's not even a fair comparison. We are crushing it because what you look like matters much more than what the estrogen is, right? And at that point, you're not having sex. You're not doing these no one wants to be around you.
It is so weird though, because I swear I've been doing this for a long time, despite what some other gurus out there will tell you. But I've been at this since the 90s. I just haven't been on social media until recently. But I remember in the early 2000s on the message boards, everybody was like 1 milligram of Arimidex every day with test and equipoise, and then you'd have a 5 estradiol.
Yeah, but like, why would you do that? That's just it's ridiculous. We're talking about being a high.
Right. I mean, you know when you've buried your estrogen, you'll feel like horrible. You'll feel like dog shit.
Yeah. But that's not what either of us are talking about, right? Like I think the overwhelming theme of what you and I are trying to do is just bring the truth with some data to the bodybuilding world to kind of help people so we can make it more clear. There's just so much junk out there.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I was confused on it up till recently. Because there's so much mixed information and people that make compelling arguments. And you're right, a lot of the studies that they cite are done on females.
With cancer. And the doses are huge, right? And the goal there is suppression of estrogen entirely because they have cancer.
And that's the problem with getting, I love looking at studies. I sit around and I'm on PubMed almost every night just looking at stuff. But a lot of this stuff and I think I heard you and AJ talk about it, isn't relevant to our cohort. Our cohort is enhanced bodybuilders. I mean, you can take you can get certain, infer certain things from it, but then you have to sort of look at what's really happening in the real world with us.
Yeah. And the medical push to run estrogen slightly higher, like you see in these TRT clinics, again, I think that was taken out of context. I know Derek from More Plates, More Dates used to talk about this years ago, and he had great content. I think it was just misunderstood what he was saying. He was never saying run your estrogen super high, nor was he saying crush it. He was just saying, if you don't need an AI, why are you using it?
Right. And you gotta think, at the time that he put that stuff up, that was when people were still nuking their estrogen and burying everything. That's it. Right. So
it's just the context is missing.
Right. The context was missing. So yeah. And there was, and well, you know how bodybuilders are, man. If you tell them a little bit's good, they're going to do 10 times that. So it was this, I think part of it too was guys wanted to chase that dry, hard look year round. And we know that dry, hard look year round is not healthy for you.
No. And more conducive to growing.
Right. It's not great for growing either. It's not great for growing.
Or joint health or anything else.
Right. So, I mean, really, the funny thing is, though, if you look back, like there's a crowd now that says that the super high estrogen is going to make you grow even more. The bodybuilders now aren't any bigger than they were 10 years ago when everybody was burying their estrogen.
And realistically, it's the same thing you and I've talked about, chasing side effects instead of a drug effect, right? So like you take Dianabol and your scale moves up. Does that mean you gain more tissue than you did on Anavar? Probably not. No, I'm not. And I'm also not saying that all steroids are equal in their growth, because that's not true either. But you're literally with D-bol, you're getting a methyl estradiol, you're getting an estrogen effect from it that's causing the scale to blow up. And you're looking at, that's not tissue, that's not anabolism, that's fluid.
Yeah, I was, Justin and I were talking about that, I think on one of our recent, maybe you were on there or not, but Justin said he almost wishes he could just take the scale away from clients.
Yeah, because it causes more problems, right? When people overanalyze this stuff and they try to make their own decisions.
Yeah, right? I mean, I
get what we care about.
I get clients all the time that panic on the way that the scale is moving. It's like, you'll see it when you get to a certain point on prep where the scale just stops moving and you start looking better. Yeah. And if you keep pushing the scale to go down, you're just going to lose tissue. And it's the same thing in the off season, where if you'll hit a certain point where if you keep pushing it up, you're just getting fatter.
Yeah. You can only grow tissue so fast, right? Synthesize protein so fast.
Right.
That's a genetic thing. Steroids will increase the rate, but your rate limit is your genes. And you can only lose fat so fast. It's going to be tissue at a certain point.
Yes, I don't.
What can you lose in a week healthy? 2 pounds steady?
I mean, well, you can just do the math on it. I mean, it's 2 pounds of fat metabolized in a week is 1,000 calories a day of negative energy balance.
But I'm saying, if you're a guy your size, because you're a big guy, you can get away with 2 pounds a week.
Yeah, 2 is the max I would push it.
So a guy my size is 1 pound, basically. If I'm losing more than a pound a week, it's tissue.
Yeah, I get in a panic. Like this past week, I lost 3, and I'm like, oh shit.
That's probably glycogen for 1 week.
Probably glycogen. Yeah, you're right. But
or fluid, right? If you switch as you get closer, you start to switch.
Yeah, when I start getting concerned is when I see strength sliding backwards. Yeah. So I mean, really, in summary, there's really no benefit to running estrogen super high in the off season.
No, there's a benefit to keeping it in range. That's what the range is for.
So probably would be top end of normal range, I would imagine, right?
Yeah. And depending on the person, I've noticed everyone feels different at different places. That's why none of us can make these absolute statements about what the ideal number is, because it doesn't exist. I know I've seen guys that have it at 80, which I would consider too high, and they feel fantastic. And I've seen guys at 80 that their noodle is totally limp, that nothing.
I'd be a bloated mess.
I'd be lactating. So I don't know. That's the thing, is you can't always say. That being said, there's no benefit from it being at 80. 80 is far out of the range, right? You're not getting any more glycogen or any of these other neuroprotective effects out of 80 that you weren't getting out of 50. It's not like a dose response curve like you would get from testosterone. And it makes sense in nature. When would a man's estrogen be elevated? It wouldn't. It's not a growth response. Muscle responds to androgens and to food. That's what it responds to.
That's a very good point. When would a man's estrogen ever be elevated
Unless
in
you have a
nature.
tumor or something that's causing that, it just doesn't occur. And again, someone could argue and say, well, when would a man's androgen load be 2,000? It wouldn't. But that being said, they're not going to aromatize at that rate.
Right.
Because it's set up, our body's set up to not allow it to aromatize at that rate.
Right. Otherwise,
We push things that we're forcing another situation to occur. That's the problem.
Well, that was an interesting point that you made about guys running their estradiol at the same rate as an ovulating woman. No wonder guys get mental and crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I do blood work on myself and on my wife fairly often. I think last month she was at like 150. She was even under 200. She was on the low end. She
we all
runs
know,
thinner, so she probably doesn't, produce a ton.
We all have seen people we work with estradiol higher than that. I mean, I've seen it in thousands.
I've seen it
before.
at 6. I saw 600 once. Right? I think you've seen it high too. That's usually disease.
I sent you that guy that I had that it was over 1,000.
Yeah, I mean, there's something really wrong there. But I not at least 2 or 3 times a month I get a guy in the 200s.
When I came back, I had been off steroids for about 12 years. I think 12 years. I was completely off. I came off cold turkey. And when I went to the doctor to get on TRT, because I initially started off on TRT, mine was in the 300s. And I wonder why I grew gyno while I was natty.
Yeah, well, that's why from a clinical point of view, you're not generally supposed to recommend TRT to guys who are overweight, right? Because they're just going to aromatize generally. Or they need an AI. Now, again, that doesn't mean that every clinic should just be giving an AI with every single prescription. Like, that's where it just got silly. But again, that's a whole nother issue. That's an issue with telemed. That's when you try to scale medicine. How do you do that? There's just no way to do it.
Right.
Think if you scaled coaching. Like, you just can't scale one-on-one coaching. In that,
no.
Where you're going to give everyone the same diet? How does that work? No, you're like giving everyone the same prescription for testosterone. That's also why even with testosterone, you see different doses, right? You see guys on 140 milligrams. You see guys on 250.
Oh, that's one thing. Now that I've been coaching quite a few more people, I've been coaching people off and on since I was in college. I worked as a personal trainer from 19 to 23 or so. I don't remember what it was, and then I had all these certifications stuff. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And then I coached some people off and on through my 20s, and I've just helped guys out here locally. But now that I work with quite a few people, the variance in response to food, PEDs, training from person to person is wild.
Huge. There's not a single, same with me. I don't have a single person doing the same thing.
I don't either. Like, people, I get people all the time reach out to me. Can you write me a one-off diet? Sorry, man. I don't know. Same thing with
how that'll work.
The same thing with PED protocols. I mean, we can have frameworks, but like a lot of times you just have to see how people respond.
Yeah. I mean, you and I probably both start with the same framework, right? I think all of us do.
Yeah.
AJ does as well.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very easy for us to all communicate that way because that's where we're all starting. But then where it ends up, who knows?
Yeah. I mean, you're making adjustments based on that. It's just how it goes. So I don't know. That's, once again, you and I have talked about this online. That's why I get very skeptical of gurus and whatnot that speak in absolutes about things and then infer absolutes from old studies or studies that don't apply to our cohort. A lot of this stuff is very subjective.
Yeah.
And
some of the stuff we know, though, and that's kind of the weird,
yeah.
right? Like the estrogen thing stuff we know, like I went through school and then, I started doing this online and then I started hearing this elevated estrogen thing. So I went back through textbooks and I tried to find it. I tried to find this hard in actual medical school endocrinology books. I tried to find this connection with IGF and estrogen, and it's just not there. So it's like, people are literally just making this stuff up.
I mean, just practically speaking, have you ever seen any man benefit from super physiological levels of estrogen? No, I never have either.
It would be like purposely becoming obese for no reason.
I've never seen anybody make themselves better by tripling their estradiol, go on triple the reference range with their estradiol. I've never seen.
Just like you said before, like just because a little is okay doesn't mean a lot is good. That's very American, right? That we assume everything is massive all the time.
Right.
I'll say firsthand, all the pros that I work with, all the pro level coaches that I've consulted with, they all use AIs, all of them.
Yeah.
I mean, I could think of one pro that doesn't, but pretty much all of the open guys are all running an AI.
Yeah, I mean, when you're running 2 grams of testosterone, you're going to have to.
Yeah. Some of them are running 5 grams of testosterone.
I had somebody ping me today, like, why are you running an AI with the cycle that you're on right now? I'm like, what?
Well, I don't know. That clearly they don't understand how that stuff works, and also that you're that close to a show.
Yeah.
Well, you see this though. When you and I were in Ohio at the Arnold, we were watching on TV. We were watching the Arnold Amateur. Mm-hmm. It's quite possibly the worst conditioning I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah,
and I think that's and you see it in the local shows too. I think that's a product of the estrogen trend now, because you just don't see guys coming in hard anymore.
No, guys don't come in hard. Yeah, no, that's
and that's the only thing I can think. Right, our knowledge about everything else has improved. Right, I think it's just that stuff has swung the other direction that people are afraid to do that.
I mean, you go to I'm off tangent now, but you go to any local show, you very rarely see anybody that has it dialed in. On national stage, you will a lot of times, but
generally
at local shows, it's either they're too fat and bloated, or they're over dieted. Those are the two things I usually see at local shows. But yeah, I mean, I know there are a lot of people that'll run the estrogen high right into the show, man. I've never seen it result into in a good look.
No, it's really baffling why that's even a thing.
I don't know. It just doesn't make any sense to me. All right, any parting words on this one?
Yeah, I mean, our Anabolics course, we can do more. I think if people have more interest in estrogen, we can go really deep with this. We could do hours of estrogen if you want, or any of these hormones. We plan to go deeper with all this stuff. I think people, if they're really interested, that's going to probably be the best source online at the moment for knowledge.
We're going to keep adding content, folks. I apologize. I've been slacking lately. I'm leaving my current job, and then I'm working on this full time, so I will have more time to dedicate to the Anabolics course. And Kurt is famous now, so he doesn't have a lot of time for me.
Right. I think you and I plan to do, now that you're winding that down, you and I should be doing other regular content again too, more often.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, with the Anabolics course, I mean, there's already a ton of stuff up there, so there's plenty to dig into. But we're going to continue to add new content, and I think it's a good value. And we're going to add, like I said, we're going to add the monthly live Q&A that's coming up soon. So those of you that are already subscribed, I'll get you information out about how to log into that, but that will be a private Q&A with Kurt and I. We'll do that monthly.
And I was going to say, if people have other questions that are very specific to their own ranges, like they can reach out to me, they can email me, they can always set up a consult, whatever.
Book a consult. Kurt knows more than me about this shit.
I'm just saying, gladly we deal with this all the time. Like,
if you want to know how to eat steak and rice and get big, I'm your guy. If you want to know how to dial your hormones in, Kurt's your guy. I'm just a dummy bodybuilder.
Right. Not quite, but cool. Thank you, everyone.
All right, guys. Thanks for watching.